Our next panelist is Steve Herman. Steve?
Well, both of our Dans have underlined the importance of history, and I want to do that also. But I'd like to set the historical stage for you much younger people in what it was like in 1965. The first thing you can imagine is a world without computers. That means, for example, that if you wanted to publish some observations, some natural history observations, you'd actually have to do them. Well, the scene was this, that in much of Western Europe and North America, peregrines were declining, but the difference the Madison Conference made and that Joe Hickey made was that the declines were revealed, because people were very, very careful not to talk an awful lot about the peregrine nests that they knew. In California, on the Marin County coast, we falconers had a site that I remember very well that we would visit, and it was on private land, and we'd go there, and there would be eggs in the nest. We'd come back, and there would be no serious nest defense. The male would just circle a few times and fly away. We'd go over, and there was nothing in the nest. So we, my friend Sterling Bunnell and I decided this must be egg collectors. Sorry, Lloyd. Turned out it wasn't, but we were so convinced of this that we went to the landowner. He said, no, nobody else has been coming in here. So then we concluded that the egg collectors were coming in by boat to do this. So Sterling started rewarding this guy with all sorts of canned hams and whiskey and so on, so that he would patrol the area to keep the egg collectors away. But we weren't talking about this, and that turned out to be true for many peregrine observers across North America. Joe Hickey's genius as an organizer was that he was able to bring all these people together and essentially at one time coagulate all this information and document the geographic and other extents of the decline. And that was really very, very important. Now, I think that what I can add to this is my history with DDT and my experiences with it. I can remember when it first came out, around when it first became available to me anyway, about 1950, maybe 48 or 49, when it was used as a flea powder. I remember applying it to my Cocker Spaniel Sinbad. And at that time, it was a miracle material. You could buy a paper doily for your coffee table that was impregnated with DDT, so if a fly landed on it, it would go belly up. And in junior high school, General Electric had a kind of a circus that came around and did all sorts of fancy science demonstrations. Ronald Reagan was part of that at one point, and he went downhill from there. But I can remember sitting in the back row. I was compulsively shy. And toward the end of the show, a guy went across the stage with a bug bomb with DDT, and within a matter of seconds, flies in that auditorium were dying. And that's how effective it was in those days. In 1957, I was an economic entomologist in the San Joaquin Valley in charge of of calling in the spray planes on thousands of acres of alfalfa and cotton. And DDT was the pesticide that was used on the cotton. And so I got a chance to see the abuse of DDT. It was hugely overused. I had all these acres, and it was very tough work, 105 degrees every day. And so I would go into a cotton field and check the first 100 plants in a randomly chosen row. If I found a single bollworm larva in those 100 squares, as they're called, then I was supposed to call the spray planes. Well, this didn't happen. And everyone around me was spraying. I mean, the planes were buzzing all over the place, and I couldn't find an economic threshold in my fields. So I called the head of the entomology department at UC Berkeley and the head of the biological control department to come down and check my fields for me, and they concluded the same thing. Well, eventually, my bosses were so informed by Ortho, the Chevron pesticide outfit, that there really were pests in the fields, that the vice president of the corporation called me in and said, "Steve, call the planes." This was after they offered me a weekend trip in the Sierras to their little trout stream where they had a landing strip. I was so principled then that I refused that offer. I'd do it in a minute today. So then, in 1962, when Rachel Carson published her book, it was very, very controversial, and there was a huge amount of pushback. As Glenn mentioned, the book came out first in 3 installments in the New Yorker. And I was working for the Department of Biological Control at Berkeley at that time. And one of my best friends and I got in a near fist fight over it. He was against her, and I was for her, of course. But he came around and eventually named his daughter Rachel Carson Shea. But the pushback was extraordinary. And Tom, in the episode we saw here, talked about someone in the audience at the conference talking about the wonders of pesticide. That guy was Don Spencer, and he was the ultimate nozzlehead. I've always loved that term, nozzlehead, that describes this particular retardation. And there were all kinds of them, and they were everywhere. There was a guy on the campus at Davis when I was there, who in the vet school, who lectured about the importance of incorporating DDT in butter. And I couldn't believe this. I went to see him one day, and he had a picture of a beautiful retriever with a pheasant on his filing cabinet. And before I could ask him anything about his ideas, he left, and I admired this dog, and he came back, and I said, "Boy, that's really a beautiful dog. You still have him?" He said, "Nope. Chased a rabbit one day, I just shot him." Which said a lot about the nozzlehead mentality as far as I was concerned. So at the conference, there was a lot of pushback. We looked at the possibility of pesticide, of pathogens, parasites. There was even one hypothesis that the peregrine was a wilderness species. Egg collectors were allegedly implicated. Falconers were allegedly implicated. But I think that everyone, or most people at the conference, thought that these were mostly straw men, or I suppose we would say now straw men and women. And and there was a great anticipation of the of what was going to be said about pesticides. And so into this melee with Joe Hickey came a man named John Buckley. Now I published the first account of the meetings in the November-December issue of Hawk Chalk, the newsletter of the North American Falcon Association. And this is what I wrote. It didn't make it into Joe's book for some reason, but the chairman of this pesticide session, Mr. Buckley, flew into Madison from Washington, D.C., especially for this session. He is one of President Johnson's assistants. His introductory remarks indicated that he intended that the session on pesticides be tightly run according to the chairman's rules. One of his earliest comments struck this reporter, as being somewhat more than incredible. He asked that, oh my goodness. Yeah. He asked that peregrine population changes be eliminated from the pesticide discussion. He went on to suggest that panel members refrain from using the term contamination when speaking of pesticide-wildlife relationships and use instead the word occurrence. Subjects for discussion were explicitly stated and had to be taken in the order given: environmental occurrence, concentration, so on and so forth. So this guy set the stage, and as a result, that part of the discussion was very limited. In the run-up to it, Jim Rice, a falconer from Pennsylvania, who was mentioned by Tom, standing up at the dinner and said, pesticides east, northwest. The guy that was doing the thing had a flow chart, or a flip chart, and he had all these things. When pesticides came up, he skipped it and said, well, we covered this already. And Jim Rice yelled out, "We're tired of this governmental flim-flam. Let's talk about pesticides." And Roger Torrey Peterson was sitting at a table adjacent to mine, and he got so angry he took a yellow pencil and went smashed it on the desk. So that was the sort of emotional scene there. And others have already, and some others will after me, talk about the products of the conference. But one of them ultimately was the restriction on the use of DDT in December of 1972. Everybody talks about it as a banning, but it wasn't a banning. There were some reservations. One was for use on pubic lice, and the other was on the use for bats. And I don't know how long those lasted. But, I mean the restrictions, or the... But there are a couple of us in this room, Chuck Henney included, who know that DDT was actually taken out of retirement in 1974. And millions of pounds of it, as usual, 1 pound in a gallon of diesel oil, were sprayed on northwest forests in eastern Oregon, eastern Washington, and parts of Idaho. To the extent that those applications were detected on the east coast of North America, where the stuff drifted. And that was in a battle against the Douglas fir tussock moth, a native insect, which had already collapsed or was collapsing before they sprayed it. So those are some of what I took from the conference. It was certainly a life-changing event for me, and I made many friends there, whom I've kept all these years. Thank you.
So beautiful.
Oh, okay. Fraser has asked me to read this tribute. I found it.
Tell them when it was written, approximately.
Okay. So, it was written in the very early part of the 19th century, and I found it in a book on North American hawks by John Bichard May. Is that right?
Yep.
And it's something was written by a man named G.H. Thayer, and I used it at the beginning of my account of the conference. And I think it has a very appropriate place here. Quote, "It is perhaps the most highly specialized and superlatively well-developed flying organism on our planet today, combining in a marvelous degree the highest powers of speed and aerial adroitness with massive warlike strength. A powerful, wild, majestic, independent bird, living on the choicest of clean carnal food plucked fresh from the air or from the surface of the waters, rearing its young in the nooks of dangerous mountain cliffs, claiming all the atmosphere as its domain, and fearing neither beast that walks nor bird that flies. It is the very embodiment of noble rapacity and lonely freedom. It has its legitimate and important place in the great scheme of things, and by its extermination, if that should ever come, the whole world would be impoverished and dulled." G.H. Thayer.
Thank you.